wish for your next head coach? 888-729-3776 on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. But to answer that question and many more as we head into playoff weekend for the NFL, it's ESPN NFL analyst Tim Hasselbeck on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. What's up, Tim?
What's up, Will? How are you?
I'm good, man. I want to talk about the coaching carousel. I want to talk about some of these playoff teams. But let's start with this. If you had a franchise, Tim, if you were running it either as a GM or an owner, and you needed a new head coach today, and it may be different. It may be different if your team was the Cleveland Browns, the Dallas Cowboys, the New York Giants. Who would you pick as your next head coach?
I think that each situation is different because I think, each place probably, needs something different. But, some of the guys that you were talking about, I think Matt Rule has proved that he can do a good job, that he's a good coach, that he can bring people together. We think about the mess he walked into at Baylor, and he was a guy that was coming from Temple. That's not an easy transition. That's not an easy turnaround. There's a lot of things other than X's and O's that you had to deal with, and he did a good job with it, and he has pro experience. So Matt Rule would most certainly be on the top of my list. There's no question about that. In terms of other guys, I think Josh McDaniels would be interesting. I think Kevin Stefanski would be interesting. But I personally probably, for the most part, would want somebody that's had head coaching experience.
Talking to Tim Hasselbeck here on the Stephen A. Smith Show. Will Kane filling in. All right, man, then let's play a little bit of a matching game. You said it would be different depending on the situation. It'd be different depending on your needs. Which coach would best match your situation? So let's do that. But first, instead of taking it from a team perspective, let's take it from the candidate's perspective. Matt Rule is going to be a desired candidate. There's already rumors the New York Giants are interested in him. There's been suggestion that the Cleveland Browns will place a call to Matt Rule. I would expect.
From the Carolina Panthers. He's going to have multiple options, and I would think the Cowboys would be into the mix as well.
I agree. So if you take Matt Rule and you take his qualities, which I think is correct what you laid out. He's a proven leader. He's done it in multiple situations, and you have chances, you have opportunities, you have choices to make here. Which one's the best fit for Matt Rule?
Well, I think the best fit for Matt Rule ends up being, not necessarily about the talent that's on the roster or the situation you're going into. I think in many regards, the two best jobs in my estimation are the Dallas Cowboys and then the New York Giants. I would look at them in that regard. And I say the Cowboys in the sense that, it's the Dallas Cowboys. The head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, I think they have a quarterback. And I think that when you look at their roster is really good. They have a lot of talent. I would say the Giants, because the Giants, have stability and ownership. I know that they've, been through, 3 hires now in 5 years, or 3 coaches in 5 years. But, the truth is it's a pretty stable organization, and they don't want to move quickly. If you go 9-23, you force their hand to go quickly. So that's why I think those two jobs, are the best. And I know you want to go kind of candidate best fit and that type of thing. But the truth is, if you're Matt Rule, there's a couple of really good fits.
Right.
But I guess I was saying that in the sense of this, Will. Ron Rivera, to me, is a great candidate. He would be somebody that, depending on my situation, I 1,000% would be interested in. But I don't think I want him without knowing who his offensive coordinator is going to be and who his quarterback coach is going to be and probably who his receivers coach is going to be. I would not want him for Dwayne Haskins in my situation at the Washington Redskins. I mean, you just think about the guys that he's been through on the offensive side of the ball in his time as the Carolina Panthers head coach. He's been through a slew of them, and many of them did not work out. And so whether it was Chudzinski, whether it was, Norv Turner, whether it was Mike Shula, there were a bunch of guys that had been through there. And I would argue that their offensive success was based on the fact that Cam Newton was just a unique player at the quarterback position that no one had really ever seen before. That's not what you have in Dwayne Haskins. And that, to me, is crucial with this next hire for the Washington Redskins. So, I think Ron Rivera would be a good fit at the Giants, but I don't think that he's necessarily the right fit for the Washington Redskins.
Tim Hasselbeck here on the Stephen A. Smith Show. Will Kane filling in. You have so many things you just said that I want to follow up on, but let's start with Rivera. Here's the thing. I think sometimes when I say somebody is not quite as great as they're being presented, it comes off as I think they are trash. There seems to be no capability of distinguishing between the two, so that's just the cross I bear. In other words, when I say Carson Wentz perhaps doesn't deserve all the praise that he is getting, it's interpreted as Carson Wentz is trash. That's not what I'm saying. So when I say this about Ron Rivera, I'm not saying he's a terrible coach or that he's not great, but I do look at this, Tim, and I go, why all the love for Ron Rivera? 9 seasons, 3 winning records, man. 3 years above 500. You point out Cam Newton was a big part of that. So I have a hard time, if I'm an owner, talking myself into Ron Rivera.
Yeah, well, see, I would push back a little bit. Because I think that the way, I think when you look at, some of the situations that Ron Rivera was some of the situations he had in Carolina. And then I think when you look at, winning seasons and divisions, this is also at a time where, the Saints were good, the Falcons were good. I mean, there's part of, the context of wins and losses and stuff that I do think you have to consider. He's a first-time head coach at that point. I would tell you, I think Ron Rivera would be a great fit in Dallas. I think he would be. I think there's an element of his discipline and his organization, the way he can get the most out of guys in terms of, feeling like he's for them. I think there's a lot of good qualities that Ron Rivera possesses as a head coach. I do.
Yeah. Well, let's do this.
And so that's why the love, when you see people responding, the Greg Olsons and other players responding the way they did when he was let go, I think it tells you something about Ron Rivera. And he certainly, there's like no cakewalk to play for. It wasn't like, hey, these players were talking about him because they had easy practices. I mean, that's why I think you get that from Ron Rivera.
Okay, I hear you on that. Tim Hasselbeck here on the Stephen A. Smith Show talking to Will Kane. We're going to return to that match game in just a moment, but I want to establish one other thing before we do. You think that the Cowboys and the Giants are the 2 best job openings out there. A couple of months ago, I believe, on the Will Kane Show, I ranked all the potential job openings. Of course, they weren't open yet, but we knew what to expect here. And Tim, I factored in like 4 categories: market, talent, ownership, quarterback, all of these things to add up to which is the best job. Now, everybody, because it's me, is going to expect that's going to spit out the Dallas Cowboys as number 1. But right there neck and neck with the Cowboys for me was the New York Giants. For a lot of the things you just said, A, it is New York. It's a massive stage to play on. B, it's got good ownership. But here's what I wanted to ask you about the Cowboys. Because I get so much pushback and I hear so much about that topic, people always tell me, Jerry's a massive detractor. I think I'm capable of being objective about this. I don't think that he is, Tim. I think the post-game press conferences are a problem. I don't think he's a tyrant with the roster. I don't think he has a yes man for a coach who just does what he said. I think you have to put out PR fires, but I think you get to coach the team the way you want to largely. Do you think Jerry Jones is a problem for a candidate?
No, I think like anything, there's good and there's bad with any of these owners. It's a little bit like I played for the Redskins. People are like, hey, what was Dan Snyder like to play for? I was like, guess what? Every player pretty much loved him. It was like anything you wanted. Like, you want a new player's lounge? Okay, we'll hook that up. Like, you want to travel a little nicer? We got that. Like that was the good side of it. It was like, oh, Lavernius Coles, you want a new deal? Here you go. Right. So there's good and bad. The reality is the good of working for Jerry Jones is he will pay you. Like, he will pay the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. And in terms of his meddling or his involvement in the football operations, I've said this to you before, Will, and I hope people realize this. They have good players there.
Right.
They have not chosen bad players. In fact, you can go to every single position and be like, you know what? They did a good job there. They've done a good job.
And Tim, you know what? They did a good job in how they acquired them, through the draft, through free agency, and through trade, which you pushed back on me, for example, in the Amari Cooper trade. You were right, I was wrong. But whether it was free agency, trade, or the draft, Jerry Jones as GM with his son, Steven, have done a good job.
Listen, at every level, like at defensive line, they've done well. At linebacker, they've done well. In the secondary, they've done well. Like, there are some teams you look at them and you go, they just haven't done a good job. Like Dave Gettleman's keeping a job at the Giants, And look, I think you can debate whether they got quarterback right. Now, look, they got running back right, but you can debate whether they got quarterback right. Like, they have not gotten offensive line right. So, in receiver, like, I don't think they've gotten receiver right. Look what the Giants have done. Dave Gettleman kept his job. Odell Beckham Jr. is not there. They signed Golden Tate to a really big deal. They signed Nate Solder to a contract that made him the highest paid left tackle in football. Like, here's the deal. In your division, in terms of the talent and how it's been evaluated and how it's been added to your football team, you've been as good as anybody.
Really quick, let me follow up on this. You talked about Dan Snyder and players loved him. I'm just curious, and you played for a few teams in your league. I want to know what that spectrum is like. You told me he'll pay you, he'll get you new players, allowance to do all that. What's the other end of that spectrum? You don't have to give me the name if you don't want to.
Hey, I'll give you the other end. I'll give you the other end of that spectrum. I end up at the Arizona Cardinals, and I've been cut by the Giants, and my equipment hadn't showed up in Arizona yet, hadn't gotten to Scottsdale, from New York in time, and I didn't want to go into the shower without shower shoes on because I didn't want to get athlete's foot. And so I'm like, I'll go to the training room or the equipment room. I'm like, hey, can I get some shower shoes? And they give me some shower shoes. Well, then they take it out of my paycheck. There's $19.50 taken out of my paycheck. Hey, that's the other end of the spectrum, okay? All because I didn't want athlete's foot.
Right. That's fascinating because I think listening to what you said about Dan Snyder, I think a lot of people would go, well, isn't every NFL owner, isn't every billionaire like that? I guess the answer is clearly no.
No, they most certainly are not all the same.
All right, Tim Hasselbeck, ESPN NFL analyst here on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. It's the Stephen A. Smith Show. Will Kane filling in for Stephen A. All right, let's go back to our game now. I asked it the wrong way to you. I asked you about Matt Rule, okay? And you're right. He's probably going to have somewhat of his pick of the litter. I'm not saying he's going to be the number one candidate, but he'll be able to ask himself which is the best job opening. So let's play it a different way of who's the best fit. I have to ask you about the team, and then if the team has their choice, what works best with their roster and their situation, their owner.
Okay.
So let's do it with the Cleveland Browns. Who's the best fit to get that thing working?
I think you probably should hire Josh McDaniels.
And why is that?
Well, I think that he'll come in with a certain level of a certain level of clout with his experience, working with New England and the success that some of them have had. And I think there's an element of like, no, this is how we're going to do it because it's the right way of doing it, because I've seen it work. I've seen it create a dynasty that you can come in there and you can change the culture that way.
Okay.
I think, in part for Baker, I think it'll go from being like, hey, having fun, like joking around with Freddie Kitchens and doing that. I think it'll become a much more business-like environment.
Okay, good. Josh McDaniels to the Browns. All right, now the New York Giants. Who's the best candidate to fix their situation?
Yeah, I think it ends up being probably Matt Rule. So I think because of, a little bit of history there, some familiarity there, he worked for Coughlin. There's enough kind of, okay, hey, we know who you are, some ties up in that, area of the country. And I think ownership very comfortable with him and his track record. And I think for him, he'll have a plan in place. And I think there's some things that there's a couple pieces that are in pretty good shape in terms of like running back, for example. But I think it's a bit of a project. And so for a younger guy, you can maybe do a little bit longer deal. But, I don't know what Baylor's paying him, but you're going to have to pay him a lot of money. That would be the one thing I'm not totally sure about.
There are reports today that Baylor has made him a top 10 coach in college football in terms of pay, and he has a massive buyout. Tim Hasselbeck here on the Stephen A. Smith Show with Will Kane filling in, playing a matching game here. Let's keep going. There's only a few more openings right now that we know are going to be there. Carolina Panthers, who's the best match there?
Carolina Panthers. See, I think because of their quarterback situation, and to me, that's an unknown situation. I like a guy like Kevin Stefanski would be an interesting guy there. Because of, he's kind of been around that, that if you will, the Mike Shanahan, Gary Kubiak, Kyle Shanahan. Like, to me, he's kind of in that mold a little bit in terms of that's what he would do offensively. And I think with, trying to figure out who your quarterback's going to be and when you're going to actually find that guy, that is the direction that I would go. Something, along those lines with a younger coach, probably, with the experience on the offensive side of the ball, but going to do something that's been a tried and true, proven deal in the NFL,
right,
in terms of scheme and philosophy.
All right, two more. The Washington Redskins, who's the best fit there?
Well, I mean, I feel weird saying somebody other than Ron because he's there, So do I think that Ron's the best fit there? I don't. I guess I would just say this: of the spots that are available, and where you're saying, I would say that I think you could have flipped these two guys. I think Mike McCarthy would be good in Washington or in Dallas. But so if Ron Rivera has filled that seat already, I think that when you go and you look at, the Dallas situation, I could see Mike McCarthy having success either place and being a good fit either place for those teams.
And is that your answer for the Cowboys then? McCarthy's the best fit?
Yeah, well, I would say of like the guys that I think work. Now, I would say this, like, I've seen Tony Elliott's name, pop up with the Cowboys job. He's the co-offense coordinator at Clemson. That would be a big jump, but at the same time, I could see it happen. I've also heard that Jerry does not want to go the college route, and I would certainly understand that. Here's just what I think about Mike McCarthy. I think stepping back a year is good for him. He's a good football coach. Knows a lot of football, has coached a lot. He's been in charge before and had a lot of success. And he's not one of these guys that, like, all of a sudden he was out and he's like, look, I'm just going to collect my money and do nothing. Like, I think he's dying to get back in. I think he's dying to get back in and coach. And that means something. That means it's in the guy's blood. And, like, it's like a drug to him. Like, you can't get enough of it. Like, you're going to get a grinder in Mike McCarthy. And I think that's a good example to have when you're trying to change the culture in a building.
I want to save just a few minutes to talk about the playoffs, the wild card weekend with Tim Hasselbeck here on the Stephen A. Smith Show. But one more coaching question, and I want to ask you, look, you and I are friends, we talk, you push back on me, you give it to me, so I actually think you're the perfect person to ask this to. I acknowledge that I am being hypocritical here. A year ago, I said Urban Meyer is not a leader of men. He's not the right leader for a bunch of college-aged guys trying to become men in this world, that he's overlooked scandal after scandal at job after job. A year later, Tim, I kind of want him as the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, and largely because I see a leader who's won at every single stop that he's been. I know I'm being hypocritical. I can tell myself there's a difference between amateurs and pros, and I can tell myself there's a difference between college and the NFL, but I still somehow see him as a leader who can win at the professional level. Am I being a hypocrite?
No, I don't think you're being a hypocrite. I mean, look, you referenced me being on a bunch of different teams. I was on a bunch of different teams, and I would tell you that, if I were to coach, I would hope to be able to coach like Andy Reid because I love the way that he did it. And that doesn't mean that, everybody I was around, didn't do it, the right way. I mean, Tom Coughlin was, a good coach and a good leader, but, he did it a different way. There were some other coaches that, listen, Joe Gibbs in the Hall of Fame. I played for him. He did it a certain way. And, Steve Spurrier, played for him. He did it a different way. Like, I just think that there's a different way to do things. And you're dealing with different kinds of people. And, not everybody is going to have the same type of, moral compass or standard for how they treat people, talk to people, how they communicate with people. And so, but if you think like it ends up being a good fit, and I'll tell you, could Urban Meyer end up doing a good job in Dallas or Washington or Carolina? Yeah, I bet he could. I bet he could. There would be some adjustments, and the game is different in pros than it is in college. But I don't think you're being a hypocrite. I think if you're just like, hey, listen, I'm sick of my team being 8-8, 7-9, 9-7. Like, and we want to be really, really good. Like, does he put us over the edge? Like, it's not. I mean, I think that
there's a good
Urban
chance
Meyer would be somebody you consider.
I think that Urban Meyer's a good chance that he could be the guy that does that. Last question for Tim Hasselbeck here on the Stephen A. Smith Show with Will Kane. I got to ask you about Wild Card Weekend. I'm going to give you 4 teams, Tim. Teams that if they made a run would be a little bit of surprise. You tell me which one you think has the best chance to make a run in the playoffs. It's in the NFC, the Eagles and the Vikings. In the AFC, it's the Titans and the Bills. Which of those 4 teams, in your mind, have the best chance to make an extended playoff run?
The Vikings. And I say that because I think the quarterback's a better player than most people probably give him credit for being. They need a healthy Dalvin Cook. I mean, his speed is significant, but they're good on defense. They're well coached on defense. They've got two really good wide receivers, an excellent tight end. I think they're, I was talking about scheme and Shanahan Kubiak tree. I mean, the reality is their offense has benefited scheme-wise from what Gary Kubiak has, helped them do in Minnesota. So I think it could be them. I really do. I think they're a really dangerous team with a lot of talent.
All right. Always good to talk to you, man. It's ESPN NFL analyst Tim Hasselbeck here on the Stephen A. Smith Show.
You didn't tell me. Who would you hire? Who's your guy? Who's your number one guy?
I have four guys, Hasselbeck, and I keep reshuffling the order. They are Jim Harbaugh, Urban Meyer, Matt Rule, and who's my fourth? Oh, Lincoln Riley. Those four guys I keep reshuffling over and over.
Okay, now here's another question for you. If you were Matt Rule, or the Rule maybe not good. If you were Lincoln Riley making what you're making at Oklahoma,
right?
Quarterbacks recruiting you, okay? Now you're recruiting them,
right?
Would you go make the same money to be the head coach at the Cowboys?
I think I would.
Really?
I'm just ambitious like that.
Wow. Amazing.
Or they could just keep going to the first round of the college football playoff and losing with no defense. I mean, that's always an option for your career. You can always do that too.
Hey, you know what you could do? You know what else happens? The checks don't change when that happens. Just letting you know.
I wonder. Do they not? Do they not at some point?
Just letting you know the checks do not change when that happens.
All right, Tim Hasselbeck. Have fun, man. Have a good New Year.
See ya.
All right, download the Vivid Seats app and enter promo code ESPN.